with the benefit to our environment. So I absolutely would be in favor of supporting any green initiatives. Now, one last thing that I'll plant a little seed. We can all do better if we all recycle, and we're committed to recycling, but also down the road, if we can go ahead and do what Portland has recently done, where they divide their wet garbage and their dry garbage, they have actually been able to turn their waste into a money-making venture. They go ahead and they sell their compost to other cities, and they actually make more money for their tax base.
I also support Mayor Dean's initiative to make Nashville a greenest city in the Southeast. I think there are some concrete steps we can take. One of those obviously is looking at some of the zoning requirements about solar panels on homes in East Nashville. There's some issues with the zoning, the conservation historic overlays that may prohibit that in certain circumstances. To me, I think maybe a common sense amendment or change we should look at to see whether people can put those on their roofs to help out with the energy usage. Other things I know that's been talked about coming up in the future is the idea that in Metro, you can only get one trash can. If you get more than one trash can, you may have to pay extra for that. An idea to keep people, make them aware that more trash costs more money. That might be another common sense way we can start to work on limiting the amount of waste we put into the landfills in Nashville. Another thing I think is going to be very important is public transportation. Again, smog is an issue in Nashville. We all see it when we come in and we drive around town. That's because we have to drive a lot of places in Nashville. It's a very car-oriented city. That's something that Mayor Dean's talked about when he's out talking about Nashville as a great tourist destination. The common word is that you can't come to Nashville without a car. You need a car to get around to different places. If we increase our public transportation, people have an opportunity to not use their car every day. I think those are some concrete steps. I'm going to give a shout out to Dan here because also we got the urban Greenland that's coming up in East Nashville. Those kinds of things like that where we can have an experiment place that we can talk about different ideas, where we can train both school children and government officials on ways to look for opportunities to increase our greenness in Nashville. I think those are going to be some important things. I also, and we're talking about tax financing or championing new buildings. For instance, the Pinnacle building downtown has a very green roof on it. It was just talked about in the paper. Perhaps maybe creating incentives or encouraging that kind of development when we're talking about tax increment financing or those buildings, they get extra for that kind of stuff.
Please share your thoughts about the home-based business ordinance currently in process, and if you think it should be passed as is, currently proposed, or if tweaks are needed to some of the restrictions that it spells out.
The current home-based business ordinance, for those of you who don't know, actually allows homes to have a legal method of engaging in a home business, whereas a lot of folks that were operating home businesses before were doing so and should be able to do so, but didn't necessarily have the ability to do so legally. I support the function of what is behind the ordinance in the sense that I want to encourage folks in East Nashville to open up a business, not have a hindrance to do so. In this day and age, a lot of people make money just by sitting at their homes on their computers. They make their own stuff in their kitchens and things like that. I want to encourage that entrepreneurial spirit, and I want to allow folks, not just in East Nashville, but across our city, to open their home recording studio, to opening their home marketing business and selling marketing things, and opening up their web design business in their home. The problem that I have with the ordinance, though, is that it limits the amount of square footage that you're allowed to use in your home. The city wants to tell you in that ordinance that you can only use 500 square feet. Now, again, that's what currently is on the books right now. I want to see that change to actually allow you, ironically the homeowner, be able to decide how much of your house you want to use for your own business. The other thing I want to allow is I want the character of the home to not change. One of the worries that we all have as a neighbor is if my next door neighbor opens up what effectively is a McDonald's next door to me. We don't want that foot traffic going in and out all day. But the ordinance only allows 8 people for an entire day. In some places, again, that's reasonable. In some places, that's unreasonable. But again, what the government is doing is we're drawing a line and saying 8 people is appropriate, 9 is not. And so, number one, I want it to be able to be enforced. I don't want these sentinel agents standing on every corner counting the number of people that are going into houses, but I also want to make sure that it's a reasonable bill that allows businesses to open and not hinder them.
I'm in favor of passing a version of the ordinance. Now, whether it's this one or not, it's an open question. Again, as Dave mentioned, currently, if you're working as your home as a web designer, a CPA, or marketing consultant, that's technically illegal at this point. We want to, again, encourage businesses to be able to work from their home before they have to go out and open and go to spend the startup costs of finding leasing space, things like that. So it makes sense to make that legal rather than illegal, because again, it creates more property taxes and improves our tax base. The bottom line is that there should be a goal or a balance between that goal of allowing people to operate businesses from their home while also being aware and minimizing the impact on the neighbors. No one wants to see a constant foot traffic or lots of parking issues, especially in East Nashville, of essentially what should be a business in a commercial area in someone's home in the middle of our residences. Again, the square footage requirements and the number of people, if we're talking about where you want to decide, if you have free reign to decide that you want to use your entire home as a business, that technically is, I think, contrary to what the goal of it is, to sort of have a small home-based business. If you're going to use your whole home, then maybe you should find leasing space. Go find a commercial area. Again, when we're talking about the number of people that may come in, who's to say, well, that's what maybe need to look at to figure out what the impact is going to be. The bottom line is I think we should pass some version of it, but be aware that it needs to be tailored so that it doesn't affect the overall character of the neighborhood and specifically the neighbors around that business and that home.
I think that this bill and this legislation essentially does try to address a scenario that's already happening, and what it tries to do is bring people into compliance, set a standard for future activity, and I agree with that. I think that sets a standard that we can all then hold our neighbors accountable to. As far as any specific components of the legislation, I think it's pretty well established as it is now. I don't have a concern with the square footage. I would agree with what Hans was saying about the idea that if it is a home business, then it shouldn't be something that takes up the entire space of the home. As far as the number of visitors, I think that we do want to see foot traffic minimized. I do think we need to, we'll see how this works out. If there's a change that we need to address later, we can talk about that. But right now, I think that overall, the overall guidelines that are laid out, I think it will address most of the scenarios that arise.
Thank you. We have one more question, and then we'll go to summations.
My question will actually make more sense if I can put it in some context for the candidates, and hopefully Zach won't give me the red card. I'll be quick if I can. One concern that I've always got every election cycle is to try to differentiate, and I apologize, it's really weird to ask questions of people behind me, but is to try and differentiate between those candidates who are running for Metro Council because it's a stepping stone to some other political office or government office, whether that's a mayoral appointment or whether that's another elected office, or maybe they're just running for office because it's an ambition of theirs to be on the Metro Council. To differentiate between them and the ones who are running because it's a logical extension of the work they've already been doing to improve quality of life in a nuts and bolts way in this neighborhood. And so what I'd like to ask each of the candidates to do is to make their best pitch to convince me that the reason why they want to run for Metro Council and be my Metro Councilman is because it's an extension of the work they've been doing, nuts and bolts work, in this neighborhood to improve quality of life here. And the only test I've really been able to come up with for that is to look at the types of organizations and positions that someone has taken. So I'd really like you to address what organizations you've been involved with, what positions you've had, and specifically, just to clarify, I'm less interested in social policy type organizations, though those are important, the Amnesty Internationals. I'm talking more like being on a committee of Rediscover East, being your neighborhood association board member, or even helping be on the committee to organize your neighborhood's winter tour of homes, whatever it might be. So if you guys could address that, and again, just convince me that this is about quality of life in the neighborhood rather than something else.
Well, it's back in front of Carlos. I'm not going to reread what Brian just asked, but I guess for me, obviously, I guess political aspirations. This is my first foray into politics ever. I can't imagine why. Everyone asks me, why are you doing this? And everyone says, that's a thankless job, right? And I say, I'm aware of that, and I'm ready to do it because I'm committed to the neighborhood. I'm concerned about that. We're creating Nashville has got a great future ahead of it, but there's going to be some tough decisions that lay ahead, and I feel like I am willing to make those tough decisions, and have been in the neighborhood working already on some of those issues. I'm currently serving as the neighborhood associate president for Lackland Springs. Through that role, we've worked on talking about crime issues, cleanup issues. We've taken first steps to organize and come up with a long-term plan for the Lackland Park, or the Lackland Springs Park, which is that space behind the Woodland Lackland Design Center. I've also served as, done a 12-week course called Young Leaders Council, which helps train young professionals on service on nonprofit boards. I will hopefully be serving as talking about serving with a group here in town to serve as a board intern for the next year on issues of vital importance to our community. I don't want to say yet what it is because I haven't officially been agreed upon yet, but we're working on that. Every day, as I said before at the beginning, I'm an attorney, and my whole job every day is to represent my client. And I do that by negotiation, through argument, and to me, that's what the councilman's going to be, is an advocate for the neighborhood. I would treat this neighborhood and the constituents in this neighborhood the same way I treat my clients, looking out for their best interest, acting as a fiduciary, being a strong advocate when necessary, seeking compromise when that's necessary, all to get to the goal of what's in the best interest of our neighborhood. And that's what I intend to do as the next councilman. Thank you.
As far as, I guess, political ambitions to set up other things to go towards that part of your question, Brian, I think that there's a good history of seeing how that's not the case. If you do have aspirations for higher political office, I think that we've seen a lot of cases where Metro Council is not a good place to start. But to be serious about things, in all seriousness, I don't have any ambitions at this point to do anything beyond the next 4 years as District 6 council member. That's all I really want to see happen. I've been involved for a number of years in a number of organizations. I've attended meetings with neighborhood associations. I've gone to a number of forums over the Civic Design Center, with Rediscover East. I've served on the boards of the Metro Board of Equalization, American Society for Public Administration, Street Theater Company, the National Symphony Orchestra League, the Tennessee Equality Project. I've been very involved in a lot of organizations that have a stake in Nashville as a whole, but also have a stake in here in East Nashville. I've worked with neighbors to help do trash pickup, to help talk about crime issues, and try to get them connected as best as possible to what's going on in our community. So I feel as if I've been very involved, and I feel as if I've been very dedicated to improving my own community around the neighborhood I live in and in East Nashville as well. And I look forward to continuing that, hopefully in the capacity as the District 6 council member.
Brian, I'll do my best job to try to convince you, but I know it's going to be tough since you're working on Hans' campaign, but I'll do my best. I think that the number one thing that we need to understand is that, I agree with Peter that Metro Council is not a good place to start if you want to jump off and have some higher political aspiration. I would say, though, that if whoever we elect as our next councilman ends up going on and achieving higher office after they're done with their term or terms, then that would be a great reflection on the great job they did. Certainly, if you do a poor job as the government representative, then you're likely not going to have much success going on to the next level. But that being said,